Girls Talk Shirts.
It's been that in so long. Oh my gosh, we're back, baby.
Season 2.
I know. Can you believe it? We made it to a season 2.
Most sequels do not do well. This one, however,
you know what?
Is just going to be better than the first.
Yeah. Girls Talk Shirts 2.0 is what I'm going to call it.
Yeah, I like it. And this week, this episode, we're starting off with a bang.
Yes.
With a return of our only guest that we've had. We have Morgan with us.
Hello, hello.
Bow, bow, bow.
And there's so much newness going on. We're in a new location. We're in a new recording area.
Yes.
And I like it. I like that it's in its own room.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is a lot nicer than what we were working with previously. It's in like an actual office area, not someplace next to a crematorium. So, I mean, we've moved up in the world.
You really have. You really have. So today we wanted to kick things off talking about, it can be a sensitive topic for some people.
Yes.
So we obviously want to be respectful of that. But we want to talk about co-parenting, the struggles that come with it, the goodness that can come from it. And we wanted to invite Morgan because she does co-parent. And I also thought about it. You grew up with co-parenting. I also grew up with co-parenting. And so I thought that would be a cool little way to segue into it as well. I know for me growing up, my parents, I was asking my parents the other day, I don't even remember how old I was when my parents split up. But I asked them if they actually had a full on like custody agreement, and they never actually did. It was just my dad could, come and get me whenever he wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
I lived with my mom. It was typically on Sundays that I went with my dad. And then he would obviously come to things. And
is it not something that you have to do like through the court? Like if you get divorced and you have children, is that not just part of the divorce?
I don't think it has to be. I think you can write it in your divorce. Like my parents went into their divorce very, this is what we're going to do. It wasn't an ugly divorce by any means. Like my mom kept our house and they agreed, because my mom took me to cheerleading. My mom took me to school. Like my mom did all the things. Like it just made sense for me to
not be uprooted.
Yeah. And so my brother and I just stayed with my mom, and then my dad just, had full access to us. And it wasn't like he was absent from our lives or anything. It was just, I don't remember realizing really that my dad didn't live there anymore. And like, I don't remember having that moment. Like I couldn't tell you how old I was when I realized like, oh, hey, he doesn't live here anymore. But I just remember like always could just go with him whenever I wanted to, whenever he wanted to. It was very cordial. But yeah, I don't think you have to like have like an actual custody agreement.
Okay.
It's really just what you can agree on. So if it's one of those things where it's mutual and there's not really a fight, then it's kind of like we don't need to go this extra step.
Right.
Okay.
I've never been divorced myself, but the parenting side of it, it just depends on how much you need to negotiate and how much you need to work out. And so if it's very similar, like Savannah said, or my experience with my parents, I only know that they divorced when I was 4 because I was told. I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
Very similarly to Savannah, I never remembered my dad not there.
Mm-hmm.
I was primarily with my mom, with my brothers. Like she did all very almost verbatim what Savannah just said. And we got to a point where I can remember I was a little bit older where we did like one night a week and every other weekend, just because they ended up living in 2 different cities and my mom remarried. And so then it kind of changed the dynamic of things. But I never had to remember horrible fights or arguments. Like those things I don't remember. So whether it didn't happen or I was shielded from it, either way. And that was 30-ish years ago, maybe less.
Yeah.
My experience was not quite like that. And I mean, I was a new mom. My son's father and I were together for about 2 years. And without getting into my my personal history, I was very much a late a late bloomer, as you would say. I waited, and I was raised in a religious household, save it for marriage, save it for marriage. And then I got in a more mature relationship, and I succumbed to the flesh, so that was a battle in and of itself. But it was very tried and true on one of those things where they're like, it can happen the first time. Like, no, not me. Second time, y'all. So, and our relationship wasn't new, but that idea was new. So I was 20 when I got pregnant. And so I did keep a firm foundation in, we will not get married. This is not the thing that we do. Like, I understand the biblical part about it. At that point, I had already been battling with myself. Like, I'm a horrible sinner. Like, there it is. There's my ticket out of heaven. I'm done. I'm done. So that was a whole thing in and of itself. But we quickly realized, we were going to do the parenting thing, whatever. We were already mature in our relationship, and we're like, okay, well, now that we're going to be a family, we need to be under the same household. We're going to raise the baby together. So he was he didn't find out I was pregnant and flee. He stayed, supported me. We both worked. Like, it was a very good dynamic until we realized that we just weren't meshing anymore. And it's almost weird to think about now in being almost 32, thinking of all of the mature thinking that I had back then, because I'm like, what 20-year-old thinks like this? But as you both can attest to, you grow up when you become a mom, right? Or a parent in general. Most of us grow up. Most of us change that mentality and think, okay, it's not about me anymore. It's about the child. And so thinking about it now, where I was just like, okay, I had to be able to separate being his mom and being his girlfriend, my son's mom, of course. You know what I mean, guys?
Yes.
Don't make it weird. Don't make it weird. So I have to separate my roles now. Am I getting what I need as a girlfriend? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do as a mom? And the mom thing was going great. I had a great village. I had great support once all of the feelings everybody had wore down. But when he was born, all was great. I had a huge village, wonderful village. And we eventually got to the point where we got into the motions, and we were living together, but then our relationship started to fail. And that's when I was like, okay, like, I have to be able to guard my heart. I have to be able to protect our son. And we just kind of had to have a mutual discussion. And so eventually got to the point where our son was about 7 months old, and we decided to split. I don't think it was a joint decision per se, but I was just kind of like, hey, I'm not getting what I need. You're a great dad. Like, you are a fantastic dad. You're just not a great partner for me. So we split. And then I did a lot of it solo, just because he didn't really fight me. And our work schedules were a little bit different. So, I was very much like I had when my parents were younger, or when I was younger. Hey, I'm not going to keep him from you. Like, my mentality was not be vindictive and be ugly, because what benefit does that have on our son? So I tried to be as mature as I could with that. And so we bickered, because sometimes the relationship stuff got in the middle, but at the end of the day, like, we were both able to start co-parenting. And then it didn't get so easy to agree on things. And eventually other opinions formed and other parties got involved. We were still young. When I say young, we're about 5 years apart. So I was still 21, like still trying to figure things out. And I was served with papers from the court, which is super scary. When you're that little, like, I say little, but like, I feel like I was just a whole different person. And they called my phone, they tracked me down. I was literally like, you've been served, like the whole thing that you see on TV. And I'm like, what do I do? And
that
then
is so scary.
It's very intimidating. It's very intimidating. And so, I called my mom, we talked. So we rationalized. And it wasn't that his dad and I were not on speaking terms. So I'm like, what is going on? Why are you doing this? And there were some outside influences. So it wasn't totally his dad. But looking back, I'm glad that we have it. I don't like the way we had to get there, because I think a lot of the intention was because there were raw feelings between his dad and I as a relationship, not as mom and dad of our son. And so it was just a very big mess. So it got a little ugly for a little while, just because we got to a point where we wanted to keep it as inexpensive as possible, but you have to hire an attorney. And so that was like, what? I'm 21. I'm going to go hire an attorney. But we did it. And so we ended up being able to settle all of our differences, all of our opinions, all of the things in mediation. However, we're mediating over a 9-month-old. It is incredibly difficult to set all of these parameters, holiday, school designation, 50-50 or 40-60, or how do you want to do this? And who does taxes? And like, I haven't been filed taxes. Like, so all of these things. And I mean, it's literally, for mediation, you've got us in a room, myself and my attorney, you've got his room and his attorney, and then you've got literally a mediator who bounces back and forth. Do you want this? Do you want this? He said this, she said that. And you just use this middle person to literally to do your bidding, right? So we eventually come to an agreement, and then we come back and we sign everything. But it's incredibly overwhelming to sit there and think about 18 years of a child's life that you have absolutely no idea what can happen in those 18 years. Yeah. And you want to set these papers. And so it's incredibly intimidating to sit there and try and think about all of these things. Like, I'm not even thinking about school. Like, I'm still trying to figure out how to keep a human alive. He's a baby. He's 9 months old. I'm trying to figure out even how to do this and how to make sure that I'm not screwing him up as a mom. Like, you want me to think about where he's going to go to school in 5 years? Like, yeah. So eventually we get to, all of the black and white of the paperwork, and we have a physical black and white copy. And of course they tell you, like, you guys can modify so long as you agree. And really, once the time passed and we were able to get past the hurt of the relationship ending, we were able to co-parent much more successfully. We've had 2 really rough patches of arguments, like 2 big arguments, I would say, over co-parenting. And those were just kind of wake up calls for us. And they were early on. So our son was a little bit over a year old where we had some issues. But as we grew older, we grew wiser and more mature and realized, like, this is not the game we want to play. My mom co-parents with my youngest brother. And so some of those things that I witnessed too, and other friends, like, I saw a lot of different models of the way people co-parented. And so I was able to say, I don't want to do it that way. I don't want to do it that way. I like the way they do this. And so it kind of gave a lot of insight to be able to figure out, okay, like, hey, what do we want to do? I understand this is black and white, but basically what they told us when we left was, hey, this is what you have to fall back on. If you guys ever want to change it, if you ever want to modify it, like, you don't have to keep coming back to court to put it in writing. Like, if you can agree verbally, change it. But if you ever disagree and you cannot find a middle ground, this is your saving grace. Okay. This is what you need to rely on, because at one point when you were both able to agree, this was the agreement from A to Z. Mm. But it could change. You can change it. You can modify. You can do as you please. You don't have to tell the judge. You don't have to tell the court. You don't have to tell your attorney. Like, my attorney did my case. We were done. We had papers, and we never had to speak again. Like, once the bill was paid and the papers were drawn, like, I never needed him again. That's not to say that co-parenting situations that get ugly don't still need attorneys regularly present, but God was still involved, even though I didn't feel at the time. God still had his hand in it, because his father and I are in a very good co-parenting relationship that actually changed the dynamic when I was reintroduced to my husband, when we reconnected, and my son's father did not have a significant other at the time. And so then it was like, okay, how do we start to navigate a step parent in the mix? And at first it was fine. I mean, both my husband now and my son's father were very cordial, a very mutual respect, because I encouraged it to be that way. Hey, nobody's trying to take anybody's role. We're all here for one purpose. And, this is how it's going to be. I want peace for all of us, So that was great. Just a mutual understanding. And then, my husband and I were together for about 8 months, and we decided to get married. And so then there's a legal authority over our child now too. So now I have a step parent, and now I have a biological parent who both have a say. Now, at the end of the day, I feel like we figured it out with his dad, and then now step parent comes in. Well, how much say does a step parent get? And how do we do dynamics? And how do we do household? Like, how are we going to run our house? Because my husband and I knew we also wanted more kids. And so then you have a blended family, and then you have to figure out all of those things. And so I would like to feel and think that, hey, we're going to keep this as cordial, as mutual as possible. Like, I didn't start this journey vindictive. I didn't start this journey with a vendetta. Like, we are who we are. We didn't work. I remarried. I would respect you in a relationship so long as the woman respected me and our child. And so that really was all fine as well. And I mean, to this day, my husband and my son's father still talk. They still have a relationship. Our families are still close. I mean, we talk, they talk, not on like a friendship basis, but just a mutual respect of being able to realize that we are now parenting a 10-year-old. This journey started when he was 10 months old, and now he's 10 years old. And so there's been a lot of changes and a lot of things that we've had to work through that no black and white paper packet could have ever prepared us for. Mm-hmm. So
how does, I mean, I know Mitch has been in his life for, I don't know if we're wanting to say names or not. That's why I paused.
It's okay. Braden. Okay. Braden is our 10-year-old.
That's why I was like, wait, we've said our kids' names, but like I forgot to ask you if you're okay with it.
Yeah. Braden.
Okay. So Mitch has been in Braden's life since he was a baby. Has there been a conversation? I'm sure there has, but how did the conversation get started in terms of how much of a parenting role Mitch had over Braden in terms of like discipline and decision making? And was that a conversation that you had with Braden's father, or was that just a conversation that you and Mitch had together?
So actually kind of like a threefold. So Braden's dad and I talked, Mitch and I talked, and then Braden's dad and Mitch talked. And so it was 3 different conversations of just kind of the expectation and the respect level. You know, like I said just a little bit ago, they started off as like mutual understanding of, hey, I'm not trying to take your place. And hey, you know, please raise my child like you would raise anybody else's when they're with you. Because I mean, we left our mediation, which I left out. We left mediation being incredibly 50-50. I mean, down to the T 50-50. So there was no, I have more say than his dad, none of that. And so knowing that I brought the dynamic of a step parent in and eventually future siblings that are blended, that would be not biologically Mitch's, that we had to have a conversation to say, hey, like, we're going to run our household this way, and I'm fine with that. However, where do we understand, not necessarily special treatment, but where do we take into consideration the different parenting styles that even Braden's dad and I have, and now Mitch and I also have different parenting styles because we were brought up differently, and then that dynamic as well. And so it didn't really come early on because Braden was our only kid for a little while. And then we had our daughter, Briley, in 2016. So Braden was about 2.5. And so that was fine. I mean, it just 2 kids you can pretty much manage, and there was no like left out. Like Braden was still pretty young to ever feel left out. I might be jumping ahead to some of your questions, but it's more recently become school age problem. So like 6 or 7, when their personality kind of starts to come out. I mean, you have to talk about parenting styles, even if you're not a blended family. When you choose a partner and you have to sit here and say, hey, we want to start a family, like, what are we going to do for our household? How are we going to run it? And so the added thing we had was, well, now we have to do it with, you know, our future children and now our daughter together, and how we're going to separate that from how we parent Braden. Not that we give him special treatment, but that we are sympathetic to the differences that our house is run very differently than his father's house is as well. And so that's a constant battle. I can say, which my husband and I have had countless conversations about, luckily, Braden's dad and Mitch have never had to have any kind of like, you know how you sometimes feel like that macho conversation, like, I'm dad, my say so goes.
Yeah.
Like they've never had to have any kind of conversation like that because, like I said, we started out with mutual respect, and I've just asked that they keep the peace that way. And so I'm the primary communicator with Braden's dad. Like there doesn't need to be really Mitch having a say so in that conversation. More so just how it makes Braden feel. It's been about the last 2 years that we've had to really navigate those feelings because, and Braden's dad will attest to this, his house is very much more relaxed and ours is very strict. Mind you, not to get in too deep, but at his dad's house, it's just him. So he's the only child. At our house, there are 4 of them, including Braden. We're very strict. We do regular chores, but we're also running our household the same as across the board. Everybody's expectations as children are the expectation. It doesn't matter who your mom and who your dad are, so he gets a very complicated and confusing blend of he's a different child at each house, which is totally fine because where his dad can afford the luxuries of, if you want it, we'll get it for you. If you want to go do this, it's just you. Where we are, okay, well, we can't just buy everybody something as soon as they say it because there's 4 of you. And there's nothing wrong with it other than Mitch and I made that choice to have more children. We continued to give our son siblings where Braden is an only kid. But it has its advantages too. He sometimes gets a little lonely over there at our house. He has lots of playmates, but then eventually he gets over being with his siblings. And so he likes to go back to the peace and quiet where it's all about him. So it's a huge balance and a conversation that we've had to have and not anything that we're very good about not telling each other how to run each other's household. That's also something that we just kind of decided on. Like basically the less arguing that Braden's dad and I can do, the better that we feel. Like it's just not worth it. Right. It's not worth it to argue. And now that he's 10, there's a lot of times where we kind of get his opinion and his say. And not that what he says is rule, but we allow him to kind of have an input. Like, how does it make you feel? What do you want to do? And kind of giving him a say in what he does. Now, if he said, I wanted to go live with my dad for a month, I'd be like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Because in retrospect, I still want my time with him and I still want to be with him. And so we still have to encourage, we're going to stick to the schedule, but maybe we can do something a little more flexible. And so our houses are very, very different. And it's only recently affected him more to kind of see where the differences are and talk to his dad and I about those differences and why they're different. And then we have recently gotten the question a lot about why are you and dad not together? Mm-hmm. Why are we not in the same house? All of my friends, all of their parents are together and they all go to one home every night. And so that's been a huge challenge for him recently. Again, one of those things you can never predict when you're trying to decide a 9-month-old's future for the next 18 years is the time where they bring up, why are you and my dad not together?
Right.
So that's been a challenge for us. It's affected him more mentally just because we switch every Monday and Tuesday he's with his dad, every Wednesday, Thursday he with us, and then every other weekend. And so it essentially becomes a 2-2-3 and then a 2-5 situation, just depending on how the weekends flow. And we've done that since we separated. It was much harder when he was younger, especially because he was a baby and I was like, wait, I have to be the primary caretaker. And so it was a little more laxed with his dad, especially with his work schedule. But we pretty much did it from pretty much 18 months on that he's just constantly done this rotation. We've talked about doing it a little bit longer since he's a little bit older. And that's kind of one of the things we've had input on, which we've given Braden like, hey, do you want to do like 7 days on, 7 days off? Like typical things that I'm noticing that you're having a hard time with is going back and forth. And not that we've ever wavered from the schedule or had to do things like that. But he gets to where like he feels like he just gets adjusted to being in one house and then he's switching again. So, I mean, he always knows where he's going. So that's not an issue, but I don't think he likes such short time frames, but he doesn't really want to change it either. Cause then he's like, I have to go 7 days without seeing mom or I have to go 7 days without seeing dad. And that's a big adjustment for him. So, I think I went more on a tangent than just the original
That's
question.
okay. No, that's
good.
okay.
That's good.
That's why you're here. I was going to say, backing up just a little bit with you saying like you started all this when he was a baby. So before he was under a year, and you're sitting there like in mediation, figuring out how you guys are going to, split time with him and everything. When it was actually set into place and you had to give him to his father for the first time, like
It was awful.
what was that situation like I can't even imagine, like, especially like when my kids were that young, like, okay, here, just take that. I mean, maybe by the time I got to Bo, like, okay, sure, just, just take one. But like if
First time
if it was like just Atticus, like I don't think I would have been able, okay, like go off and spend 2 days with him. I'll see him in 2 days. Like, how did you adjust to that? Were you breastfeeding at the time? Like, and did that affect anything?
No, I was not breastfeeding. I did breastfeed Braden for about 9 weeks. And it was just typical first time mom probs that I just couldn't hang on to it.
Yeah.
So he was formula fed. I did ask, just out of curiosity, when I was in that season, if I were breastfeeding, like, would this be different? They're like, no, you'd have to pump basically to give it. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't really take. And contrary to what people think, Florida is, well, when I say is, I'm not educated enough right now, was not a pro mom or pro dad state. They are very much 50-50, try it, please do it. And at the time, even week on, week off was an option, which they offered in mediation. And I'm like, you want me to go a week without seeing my infant? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So I think the age of the children have a huge impact on what kind of arrangement you do, and work schedules, and school. Like, if you have school agers, like, that's different. Like, it's so much easier to switch him at school than it was when he was not in school, where we constantly had to meet each other. And so, like, that's just a headache. And then I had more children. Like, it was just a nightmare. But when I had to do it, and I physically had to hand him over and be like, I'll see you in 2 days. Like,
Yeah.
I will say the best part about it was, like I said, his dad and I chose to still be friends and cordial. Once we got all of the mess of the relationship ending out of the way, we were able to still have communication. So, like, him and I would check on each other. Like, it would just, we were avidly still involved in Braden's life and able to communicate for the sake of Braden, because I probably would not have done so well had I not. But when we finally got to the fact that it was exactly 50-50 and we're going to switch and this is how it goes, like, there's no turning back on it. Braden was a little bit over a year and his mom was involved. So she was a caretaker for Braden, which made me feel at ease, because not that dads can't do it, but mothers just have a very natural nature about them. And so that's something I also had to mature past and set my feelings aside for. Some of the hard feelings that I had for his parents and the way that they treated me as his ex-girlfriend, I didn't appreciate, because I'm like, okay, I'm no longer like the ex-girlfriend. Like, I'm Braden's mom, and I need you to respect me as Braden's mom, because I'm going to respect you as Braden's grandparents. Because here's the deal. I didn't have close grandparents when I grew up. And so now that I've made a situation that Braden had zero control over or zero say in, I don't feel like it's fair to say, well, you can't be in his life and you can't be in his life. It wasn't in my nature. It wasn't in me. As much as I did not get along with them back then, where I could have been like, nope, my kid, my rules, I just didn't. And I'm not saying that it was easy. It was a lot of growing up and mature decision-making that I had to do. But at the end of the day, all I kept thinking was, long-term, what do I want for my son? Well, I want his grandparents to be involved, because I didn't have that. Now, it's not gravy. It is not a piece of cake. It is not by any means. If you are going through co-parenting and you just cannot see the light, like, there is a light. There is a way to move past it. And not all co-parenting situations are easy. Some of them never end, essentially. Like, sometimes you feel like you're always fighting. And I cannot speak for any other scenarios, because I feel blessed that I have a co-parent that wanted the same things I did And that's not always the case. Sometimes it gets really, really ugly, and it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart that people have to go through that. It breaks my heart that children have to go through that, that children often get used as pawns. And, I thank God that that was not my situation. And I pray for families that are going through that, because I don't know that I could have handled it. I felt like I couldn't handle what I was already given. And so if you had added all of that turmoil and emotional turmoil to it, I don't know that I would have been able to be as successful with co-parenting that I can say Braden's dad and I are now. So, but those first couple of times were hard. I, of course, had a village. I had my parents. I had my best friends. I had Mitch to lean on. But it's hard when you don't have somebody who's really in it. At the time, I had friends who were not from divorced homes. And so then, like, what I'm doing to my child, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, is this how my mom felt? So my mom was a really good resource to talk to be able to say, like, is this how you felt? Like, what do I do? And so I then, after it got hard, after physically, like, I wish I could remember like the first night I ever had to do it, and I just can't. But I can remember the feeling of like, what do I do with my time? Like, I'm a mom. I'm supposed to always have my child. And so, I took different shifts at work, or I was still pretty able to still communicate with each other so that I knew like I could check in at any time and see how everything was going. And then I looked forward to getting him back. So
Yeah.
One thing that I always remembered regarding when my parents were divorced. Now, granted, my parents have a weird story because they did end up back together later in life.
You're what Braden wants.
Yeah.
But I know as a kid, I always remember my parents never spoke badly of each other.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was ever, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. Or if it was just, there wasn't, you both know my mother, you can't say a darn bad thing about her, but,
she's just too darn nice.
She really is. Good Lord, woman, get some anger. But I always look back on that fondly in the sense of, my parents, if they did argue, if they did say, hurtful things of each other, it was never in front of me. My brother is like 8 years older than me. So during the divorce of my parents, he was older. So I'm sure maybe there was conversations had with him that weren't necessarily with me because I was much younger. And so was that ever an issue that you felt that you had to go through? Like, did Braden's dad ever have an instance where he was speaking poorly of you, or his parents or your parents, or anybody speaking poorly of each other to Braden that you had to kind of work through? And
was he like coming home and saying, oh, dad said this, or grandma and grandpa said that,
Luckily, no. And even still to this day, which again, it's a total 360 from where I felt like a good place was when he was younger. I feel like we're in such a better place now. Like, I communicate with his grandmother daily, just about, like, because he's in school. He's in 5th grade. So like there's a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so truthfully, and Braden's dad actually fought an illness. And so like he still needed a lot of his mom's support, which I was incredibly thankful for, because again, one of those situations where I could have been very selfish and been like, well, you can't properly care for him, like, I'll take him. That was never my mindset, because how could I ever explain to my child if they asked me, like, if Braden looked me in the face and was like, Mom, why did you take me from my dad? I wouldn't have a good answer.
Mm-hmm.
And so my heart behind the whole thing was just, what's best for Braden? What's best for Braden? What's best for Braden? And luckily his dad and his grandparents and my side of the family all was very cordial as well. We got to a point where we were inviting them to joint things, like joint birthday parties and things like that. Like, we could all be in the same room, cordial and kind. So thankfully, no. Now, can I say that he's never frustrated me? No, but that's behind closed doors that I either get out my frustrations, or we're at a point now where I'm like, you're frustrating me.
Right.
I'm really annoyed with you, because we knew if only we knew now if only we knew then what we know now, we would have been a little bit easier to just like part ways and make it a little less emotional damaging, but it's okay because I mean, we're friends. We're true friends now. And I would like to say like a shout out to my husband because I've never been a step parent and I would never like to be. I tell my husband kudos to you because like I would have a really hard time being a step parent. And I'm not saying that couldn't happen for Braden's dad one day, but like I would have a really hard time. Like I know my strengths, I know my weaknesses. And like, if that woman wasn't good enough, like I feel like I would just be, the friend to Braden's dad and be like, we can do better. Like, because we've built such a good friendship. I mean, we've known each other for umpteen years now. So prior to even having our son, like we obviously loved each other at one point. We had a baby together. So there is love there. And then it doesn't matter what the situation is, like you will always have a connection with this person.
Right.
So no, I am not in love with him, but he's still the father of my child. And at the end of the day, you have to be mature about that. Like you have to recognize that connection is always there. And it doesn't matter that they turn 18, like it's still your child together. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be able to hit that head on and tackle that head on. And there's a lot of conversation that goes into how do we do this? How do we make this work? Set your feelings aside, set your personal feelings, set your relationships aside. How do we do this for our child? Mm-hmm. And like I said, kudos to my husband because I would not be a good step parent. I just know. And, kudos to him for being able to be the role of a stepfather without stepping on his dad's toes. And so I appreciate both of them being able to do that for Braden as well, because it is very healthy for Braden to see that we can all get along. And I tell him all the time, like, your dad and I are friends. Like he calls her Nina. Your Nina and I are friends. Like we are all friends. We all get along. And I think that is so, so, so important to not hear the bashing, but to also see in person, because like I said, when he wasn't in school, we had to meet very frequently in person. Like it's not just like here's our kid and leave. Like we have conversations, we're catching up on life. And then, like I said, his dad got very, very sick. And so I had to kind of step in and be empathetic and sympathetic to the situation that his dad was going through. And so then I had even more of my emotion put into it, because at the end of the day, like if something happens to his dad, it happens to me too. Then I'm dealt with helping my young child navigate through his feelings of an ill parent or a sick parent, or, God forbid, a parent that passes. So like there was a time where I was dealing with that and trying to shield him from that and trying to protect him from that. But I wouldn't have been able to have that much concern and heart had I not developed a good, strong co-parenting relationship with his dad. Like if we were not speaking, if we were not on good terms, it would have been like, whatever, I don't care what happens to him. Mm-hmm. But I want Braden to see that it is healthy and that it is okay and that we all work together for the good of him. So that was, luckily, praise the Lord, never a situation. Like I said, we had two very difficult spouts where, it got a little ugly for a little bit, but when you look back on it, we learned from it, we moved on, and we're like, that's not us. That's not us. That's not what we want to be. And here we are. Like I said, he's 10 years old, and I feel like we are in a very good, successful co-parenting relationship.
Right.
So.
I feel like people need to realize, you all have the same goal.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to raise a decent human being. And like, emotions aside, just because your relationship didn't work doesn't take away the fact that you're his mother and he's his father. And, as, hard I'm sure it was to split, Braden wouldn't be Braden if it wasn't for you and for his dad. And, he got parts of both of you. He wouldn't be him. And so as hurtful as, losing that relationship, I'm sure was at that time, you still have to be grateful for the fact that Braden is who he is.
Yeah.
And I think you just need to keep that in mind. Like you all have the same goal.
Right.
You're all in this together. But something you did say that pointed out to another question I had was that you could eventually invite each other to like joint birthdays parties and stuff. Do you guys do joint things, how is like events, and then also how do those events work with your other children? Do they ask questions regarding?
So, we're not at a point where we do like joint parties, mainly because the family dynamics are a little different. My family is very, very, very large, as you both know. And that can be intimidating sometimes. His dad's family is smaller, so they like to do more intimate family gatherings. So it's not like a you're not invited kind of thing. It's just, well, you do yours, I'll do mine. However, he's in school, so he's doing sports now. And so that is very much we have to be in the same room. We have to be able to communicate. We have to be able to do transportation. Like that's a lot of, like I said, I literally talk to his grandmother probably almost every day. Just making sure that we have everything he needs, because then we never want Braden to feel the impact of like, oh, I left my folder at dad's and I left my belt at mom's. Like we always want him to feel prepared and as little interruption in his schedule as we can help it, aside from literally going to a different house than he woke up in. Mm-hmm. And so we're very good at communicating. We're very good at keeping that in line. But as far as my other children, I don't really remember what ages they kind of understood what it was. Like they still don't. They're 8, 5, and 3. And so they don't really understand what it means. However, they do know his dad by name and his grandparents by name. And we've actually gotten to a point where within the last year, like his dad and Braden's dad and Braden's grandparents actually like babysat our kids one day. They were very, very intrigued to go to Bubba's house.
Whoa.
And so it's not a regular thing, but it's intriguing to them. But because we do a drop off at their house, right? So we're pulling into their driveway, their home, and Braden gets out, the natural, and our kids just like want to follow their brother. And so it's one of those things where we drop him off and they invite us in and we talk or whatever. And so then they get to see Bubba's room. And so then it was like this whole big exciting thing where they were like, oh, well, we want to see. And then literally his dad or his grandmother, I can't remember who, was like, well, they could come over for a play date one day. And we're like, okay, like, you sure you want to do that? Like you've met them, right? And so our middle 2 children spent an afternoon at Braden's dad's house with them. And so, I mean, had you asked me that 10 years ago, I'd been like, absolutely, no. Like, no. But I mean, like I said, with the relationship, and I know I keep going back to that, with the healthy relationship that we have created and the environment that we have created, essentially they are a part of our family too. And our kids have just open arms to come to that. Like they have just, they can understand, the difference in titles that they call and Braden's other house, or they call his dad by name, like his house, or Bubba's house, or this is our house. But it's exciting, There's a part of it where it breaks my heart that they have to miss their brother, but they get so excited when he comes back. And so that it really builds on their relationships together because, all siblings fight and eventually they get tired of each other. But it's just long enough that they miss him and they look forward to it. Now, my 8 and 5-year-old are very keen, specifically my 8-year-old daughter. She is very much in the know and she's like, okay, we get Bubba back on Wednesday. And then we kind of go into the routine. So they've even adapted to our routine and our schedule because we kept it so consistent, because we kept it the same, to not try and disrupt them either. But the way Mitch and I decided to run our household is it doesn't matter if and when Braden is there, the household runs the same. Mm-hmm. And so we never want him to come back and be like, okay, well, Bubba's here, so things change. Like, okay, now we do plan B when Bubba's here. No, like they come in, it's the same across the board, the same rules, the same expectations, if not more expectations on mine and Mitch's children together, because you have no excuse for any kind of trauma, right? Yeah. You are in a perfectly balanced household. You have no excuses. And then I kind of touched on it a little bit that the illness that his father is still battling with, that it brought us closer. So it brought our families closer. It allowed us to be prayer warriors in their life and kind of speak to them and try and also be able to, speak life into them in that regard as well. They weren't necessarily a religious household to begin with. And so that kind of changes your viewpoint on things. And so Mitch and I and my extended family were able to pour into them and support them in that really, really hard time. Even still some of the battles that he has now. So a lot of things change. And again, going back to what I said, staring at black and white paper, trying to plan out my son's next 18 years, like you don't see this at even age 10. Like I could have never thought. And now one of those big things that you have to sit there and write out is holidays, how you spend the holidays with your kid. Well, we both want Christmas and we both want Thanksgiving and we both want his birthday. Like, how do you decide what's good and what's bad? And then we got school thrown in there and we're like, well, he spends half of his birthday at school. Well, he doesn't, he's a summer baby, but it's just so much that you just have to sit there and plan, quote unquote. And unfortunately, there are scenarios where parents can't agree on it. And so that plan that you made 10 years ago, you still have to stick to, even though it doesn't apply to the life that your child or you guys live right now, but you can't disagree to save your life and you have to default to it. And sometimes it's just super inconvenient. Like there are multiple holidays, especially when you get into Thanksgiving and Christmas, because they fall on different days every year as far as like when they fall, you know, or like we don't do some of the federal holidays as like Martin Luther King, Labor Day, like those kinds of things. It's the ones where we're like, okay, it matters who he's with and what we're doing. Like typically where you get family together or things like that, because then not only are you thinking about yourselves, you're having to think about, well, is he going to be able to see these grandparents? Like how often is he going to see these cousins? How often is he going to be with these aunt and uncle? So like you kind of have to make all of your plans and all of your scheduling around one person, right? So I'm like, okay, well, on my weekend, we'll be able to do this and we'll get together. And so it limits, which is sometimes still to this day frustrating. Like, you know, someone will invite us and they're like, oh, we want Braden. I'm like, well, I don't have him. You know, it was a little bit more of a struggle a couple years ago. But recently, which is what your question kind of stirred up in my mind. Recently, we've gotten to the point where if we've got something going on and Braden's at his dad's house, he'll ask his dad, hey, you know, this is going on with mom. It's a birthday party or it's an event, or mom's going to the movies with, you know, my other siblings. Can I go? And dad's like, yeah, sure. So as long as we were able to figure out transportation, he just lets him. We've never been those people that are like, okay, well, if you take my 3 hours, I get my 3 hours back.
Right.
Like, that's just too much. And I don't know if that's my mentality because I had multiple children. Like I'm already balancing a ton of schedules. Like I don't want to sit here and figure out how many hours I owe you. Like now, if it's consecutive nights, like what's been really, really great is we try to plan vacations. And because of the way we have our schedule, we don't ever have a significant time other than 5 days, which typically includes 2 work days to vacation. And so in those instances, when they're pre-planned, I can say, hey, Dad, you know, this is what we're doing. Can we go ahead and swap some of these days so that you still get your time with him? Because that I do believe, like if it's consecutive nights in a row, like that's not fair for me to be like, hey, can I have 10 nights in a row and you get your 3? Like,
right.
So in those instances, yes, but I do know that there are situations where it's like, you owe me 20 minutes. Or if, you know, you meet too late, you know, you meet that much later the next time. And I'm just like, I just don't have the energy. I don't have the energy. And unfortunately, some of them have to be so black and white by the papers. And you can't waver from them, unfortunately, because you just can't disagree outside of the black and white that's on the paper. And unfortunately, you know, there are situations like that. And like I said, it breaks my heart. And I continually thank God where I'm just like, I'm so glad, you know, that I was able to be blessed with somebody who wanted to do right by the child. And it's hard to put the child first if you're still battling with you two as a relationship. I think a huge way for me to do that was not necessarily to jump into a relationship with my husband, but because we rekindled a previous past so quickly, we knew in my mind, like, okay, like you're the one, I'm going to settle down. We're going to get married. And we included Braden's dad in that discussion, not like, can we have your permission to marry or not? But
right.
like hey, I'm thinking about getting married. This is going to change the dynamic of our co-parenting relationship. You know, what are your thoughts and what are your feelings? And so it was my goal was to always be very healthy, very open about scenarios like that because I wanted it to be successful. I wanted it to be a situation where everybody could be in the same room if we needed to be. And we can. Braden can see that we all get along. We all are together. And like I told you, his dad and I are friends. Like I will tell Braden, we're friends. Like we are friends. If you described a friend, like I care about your dad and I love that he's your dad, but he just didn't work as mommy's boyfriend, and he would never have worked as mommy's husband. And I'm okay with telling Braden that, because he's trying so hard to understand, why can't you just do it? Why can't you just do it?
Yeah.
But then you look at him and I'm like, well, if it was just me, you and your dad, like, we wouldn't have sister and brother and sister, and you wouldn't have, he calls him M-Dad, my husband. You wouldn't have M-Dad and then M-Dad's extended family. And so all of these relationships that have come about from having a step parent and everything that entails, like, you wouldn't have that. And he was like, well, I would miss that. I'm like, right. So there is some good, but he is really, really struggling right now with switching back and forth and just trying to, he's trying to get me to have a finite reason why his dad and I didn't work. And I'm just like, buddy, I don't have a reason. Like, some people are just made, and we raise them in a Christian household. So we're very much trying to say, God makes you for one person and one person only. And your dad and I were not made for each other. We're better as friends. We get along. And I'm very honest. Like, we argued and we fought a lot. Like, it would not have been a good environment for you. And so, it's still hard at even 10 to wrap your brain around that, but that is a current struggle. I think that was one of your questions later on. It is a very current struggle that we're facing, which nothing can really prepare you for, because I can't change it. I can't go back and undo it for him. And I wouldn't undo it in the sense of not having my husband and our children together. But if I could change the way it made him feel, because I've tried to tell him, like, hey, mommy came from a divorced home and I'm good now. Like, I'm okay. And he's like, I'll never be good. I'll never be okay with it. Like, but you can, like, you can get past it. And I mean, I'm almost 32, and sometimes I'm like, what if my mom and dad were together? Like, I can ponder it.
Like a Parent Trap sort of situation.
Yeah, like, I can ponder it because, different than you stated, like, my parents did not get back together. I, in fact, had to learn about stepfathers and step siblings and things like that, which is fine. But I just don't know how to mend his heart. And as a parent, that is heartbreaking because I don't know how to help him. Like, other than we recently got him into some counseling so that somebody else can navigate it. Because I recently learned, like, I can't help you navigate it because you're mad at me and you're mad at daddy and you're mad at him, dad. And you have a right to be angry because we did something to you that you had no say in, no control over, and we're making you deal with it. At least until you can drive or you can get yourself to point A and point B, or, you're old enough to have a say on where you go. I can tell you that it was a huge struggle in the last 2 years that when times got a little bit tough, and like I said, Mitch and I run a much more strict household. So when he would get in trouble or things like that, he's very, very sensitive. And he's like, I want to go to dad's house. I don't ever want to live with you again. And so, like, don't let me sit here and preach rainbows and unicorns and happiness all the time, because there are moments where I am broken and I am hard on myself. And I have to sit back and say, okay, God, like, you got this one, because I don't know what to do. I don't know how to tell him, like, I love you and I want to be with you and I'm sorry you're mad at me. But, like, his instinct is to run away from mom's house. And, Braden and I had a really rough patch 2 years ago where we were just like, we were not getting along. And then him and my husband were not getting along. And that was even worse. Like, and so I kind of wanted to be like, you know what? Let your dad have you for a little bit. Cause, like, I got to my emotional max and my heart couldn't handle it. He didn't want to be with us. And I know that it's not because he didn't want to see us, because I know that when you're telling a child no and you're getting on to them, like, the instinct is to be like, I don't like you. But, to hear, I want to be with dad. And I just, and I can admit to being angry sometimes and not controlling my mouth as I should as an adult, and being the adult in the room and being like, well, do you want to stay with your dad forever? Like, you know what, if that's what you want, go. I can admit to being in those emotional moments where I'm just like fighting him. Like, I'm trying to do what's right for you. And I know that it's very different from dad's house to my house, but this is what I feel is best for you, And I just had to tell myself that what I'm doing is right, and the work that I'm putting in is right, and I'm going to make him a decent human being, and I'm going to make him respectful, and I'm going to put him into the workforce successful and ready to be an adult one day. and I'm just going to have to deal with the, I hate you, I want to live with my dad. Different than my biological children with my husband, who, I'm mad at you, well, go to your room.
Yeah.
He has a place where he wants to physically get away from mommy. And I mean, that's not something black and white paper can prepare you for either. So that's been a struggle. And not as bad, because the older he gets, the more we're able to talk him through it. But counseling is new. Counseling is new to be like, okay, I have to understand that he's angry, which has been a huge thing for him, for us to be able to recognize that he's angry and to be like, you know what? I am the root of part of his anger. His dad is the root of part of his anger, and his stepdad is the root of part of his anger. So he needs somebody unbiased to be able to be like, I'm mad at my mom and my dad and my stepdad, and this is why, and I want this, or to just get it out, because he talks to me and he talks to his dad and he talks to my husband, but it's very different to talk to the root of your anger and be like, I love you, but I'm really mad at you, rather than talking to somebody who you're not mad at, and a counselor who makes you feel comfortable, and someone who makes you feel like you can just kind of get the burden off of your shoulders. And so, again, I didn't think 10 years ago when we looked at documents that he would need counseling, and there is nothing wrong with counseling. I think it is a great resource and a great outlet. And I wish I would have done it sooner for him. Not because we saw any problems, but because I wish I would have known to give him that outlet sooner, give him that person to talk to. Because really, if you look over the family dynamic, who is there to talk to that's not biased? Mm-hmm. If you talk to my mom, well, she's on my side. If you talk to dad's mom, well, she's on dad's side. So who really is there to talk to other than a counselor or a therapist or, somebody in that field that can talk to them? An outside perspective, and they're not the root of part of your emotion. And so looking back, if I could have gotten him in sooner, and not that it had to be like a weekly session when he was 5, but at the point that he was able to talk and he started asking questions, if I could recommend anything to, split parents and split households, is to, when they start asking questions, pull in that third party, whether it's family counseling, which is totally great too, or individual counseling, or just somebody for them to talk to that is unbiased. It's not mommy's friend. It's not daddy's friend, somebody they can talk to and just let it all out, because I wish I would have done that sooner when he started asking questions. I think it would have helped with some of the behaviors that we saw within the last 2 years that were very not Braden. And that's when I kind of got my sign like, okay, we've got to intervene. And it's essentially just a child acting out more dramatically than normal. I mean, he's a good kid. I mean, he doesn't really like school, but what 5th grader does, and then we were having some problems at school with behavior. And so it was one big incident where we were like, okay, hold the phone. This is very abnormal. What's going on? And so that and a recent event led to counseling. Like, we should have started with this. We should have led with this. The moment he looked at us and said, why are you not together? Mm-hmm. So if there's any advice that you get from my tangent just now, please, please, please let your child have that outlet to what you're comfortable with. I mean, like I said, family counseling is great. It shows unification, or just child counseling. I mean, there are so many resources out there, and it's healthy, and counseling is not something to be afraid of or to be shamed for. It's just a great outlet. Like, you feel like you get some of the weight off of your shoulders, and honestly, he needs it. Yeah. He needs it to be able to navigate his feelings, because it's a lot of big feelings in a very small body and a very small mind, in a much bigger world that he doesn't understand, because he's not an adult yet, of course.
Right.
So
you mentioned a little bit about his relationship with Mitch. Is it something that they are still working on? Like, did it used to be like really good, and then just more recently, as his behavior started to change, it's gotten harder? Or
so it was much easier, of course, when he was little, because toddlers just kind of go with whoever gives them attention. But it more so, Mitch is very, very strict, and we've had numerous conversations about just our different parenting styles. So even leaving Braden and his dad out of it, like our parenting styles and how we handle our household in general. So our parenting styles differ, but I can tell you, and he would agree to this, that my instinct is to protect Braden, because for a while it was just me and Braden. I mean, he was my whole world, and not that he's not now, but being, having the Christian household dynamic, God, spouse, children. And I had to be able to battle, which is not something I thought about when we were talking about the early years. Something I had to battle, and Mitch and I had to talk through, because I'm like, no, Braden came first. Like, I understand how God's way is, but this is my way. Like, he came before you technically. And so that was a battle in our marriage very early on, where, we had to dive into the word, and we had to get, connected into a church to be like, okay, like, and not that I feel Braden is any less, but when you understand God's design for the household, it puts you at peace with being like, okay, I understand why it's, God's spouse, children. And so that was a little bit of an early battle. But back to your question. Yes, they still have a struggling, challenging relationship. Do they love each other? Absolutely. But a huge thing that I've had to tell Mitch and remind him about over the last 2 years, and I keep saying the last 2 years because it's when it's got more challenging for Braden. He's had more questions, more emotions, more affection. Like, all the big feelings are coming out. Like, I feel like he's already kind of like a teenager. So like the hormones and the puberty, like, so they have a lot of big feelings. And so I have to remind my husband, and nobody ever said it to me. It's just one of those things that, like, this is how my thought process is. Like, it doesn't matter if anybody had to sit there and think about whether you're in a divorced home or a horrible situation or whatever your parental situation may be, as an adult or as a child, your biological nature is to love your parents, right? You are literally made from them. And so Braden's dad and I could do so much wrong. We could yell at him. We could spank him. We could ground him. We could take away the electronics. We could do all the horrible things that a 10-year-old thinks are like the worst thing in the world. But at the end of the day, there's love. There is unwavering love. What I try to remind my husband is, you and Braden have to choose to love each other. It's not natural. It's not biological. And it's not for a lack of trying, because they've both been in each other's life, Braden pretty much his entire life. And, Mitch and I were early on, he had to accept the fact that, hey, I come with him. There was never a time where Mitch and I were childless, other than when we were switching half on, half off. But I have to remind him regularly, like, you two have to choose to love each other every day. And it's like any other relationship in your life. You have to work at it. And so I could have the same tone, inflection, and same words to Braden. If Mitch does it, it's a whole different ball game, because it's not dad. And Braden has never luckily been like, well, you're not my dad, I'm not listening to you. Thank God. But I've had to remind Mitch, being the adult in the situation, like, you almost had to dial it back. One, all of our children are not the same, because I don't feel like any household that has multiple children, none of the kids are the same, right, Emily? Right. So yes. you have a parenting style in your home, but you parent every child differently, right? So when it comes to parenting Braden, I still have a defense about me that I extra protect him, because our other 3 children, they're just going to deal. Like I said earlier, they don't have any trauma. There's no excuse for your wild behavior. When Braden starts acting out, I then automatically start a little bit of guilt, a little bit of blame, and a little bit of, okay, what is it stemming from? Yeah. Is he just being a normal 10-year-old with big feelings? Or is it stemming from because he has anger and there's unresolved emotions, and there's things that he comes to this house and he's just frustrated. Like, he's frustrated that today he had to come to mom's house because he has this new game at dad's. Like, that's a 10-year-old emotion, right? Like, we're expecting them to be mature, but even as adults, we have bad days. And so I still shield him, and I know that I do, but we don't give him special treatment. But I do have to remind Mitch in private, because I am always a firm believer of, like, hey, in front of the children, don't correct each other unless it is just totally off course. In private, I'm going to correct you. In private, I'm going to say, hey, or you do it in a loving way. Hey, like, tone it down a little bit. Like, are we really going to be upset that Braden left his clothes on the floor. Like there's probably a different way to approach that. Because Braden just doesn't respond the same way he does with me that he does to Mitch. And it's simply biological. Like, and it's frustrating. And I can assume my husband is probably super frustrated by it. And I can assume Braden's frustrated by it. But at the end of the day, like I said, if it comes from mom, it's like, okay, well, I love you, mom, because you're my mom. I came from like, but I don't have to love you, Dad. And Dad, you don't have to love me. And luckily, I will say that it has never stemmed into like well, you love Briley more than me, or you love Chan, like that. Thank God that's never happened. But they do still have a constant day-to-day working relationship where they both have to choose to work at it. They both have to choose to accept it. They both have to choose to get along. And often my husband, being the adult, has to be the one that's corrected or just kind of kept in check or reminded like, hey, this is what's going on. We need to be mindful of that. Don't treat him differently. But maybe we don't, yell at him in front of his other siblings because it embarrasses him. Our younger son, he could give two craps that you yell at him. Like he'll look at you and be like, okay, mom. like, he's just a wild child. Or our youngest daughter, like she just no craps given, y'all. Like she's a rare breed. But Braden is very sensitive. And so I feel we have to be sensitive to his situation and whether or not, and I will say that Braden has never used that as like a maneuver either, where I feel like some kids, if they are being used as pawns, they then take that emotion and they reciprocate it back to their parents. Like, well, you can't tell me to do that because mom, da, 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 da. So if you have that dynamic ahead of time, then your kids will pick up on it at a later age. And they may start being vindictive and manipulative with that. But luckily Braden has never picked up on that either. And I don't foresee that he would, because we don't allow it as adults into him either. So, it is a constant struggle sometimes. But I will say that, just being able to kind of redirect my husband's thinking and making him a little more sensitive and just those sweet corrective reminders, they're doing much better than they were. But he also has to realize that he's part of the anger that Braden feels, and we just have to own it. It's kind of hard as an adult to be humbled and be like, oh, I'm the problem. It's me. Like, and so, but it is a challenge. It is a huge challenge. I had stepfathers that I had to figure out how to navigate as well. So I can kind of understand where Braden comes from sometimes. And I try to tell my husband that because my husband comes from parents who were married his entire life. So I'm like, you also don't understand what it feels like to be this child. So it's been a very, very, very big learning experience. And I'm like I said, I wouldn't change it. Some of those moments where I was feeling very low, I was like, oh God, I could have just stuck it out. I could have just dealt with it. But I know that it's not the life God had in store. And I know that he's got Braden prepared for much bigger things, and we're going to be able to move past it. And I'm very, very grateful for the relationship I have with his dad to be able to both be very, very present in his life, and be able to give him everything that he needs, even in the hard seasons. So.
Wow. Well, I know that was, an emotional roller coaster, the whole living it out and then talking about it and bringing back, I'm sure, old emotions and feelings. So thank you for opening up about that. And
yes, thank you so much. I know that there were some moments there that were very hard for you to talk about. It is.
I don't often have to relive them, but if I can, if I can cry it out one more time and it touches somebody, and it just, whether it changes a mom or a dad's perspective that's going through it right now, or a situation where you're just like, I don't know what else to do, or I don't know what's best to do. Maybe it touches somebody, maybe it plants the right seed. Or maybe you're just somebody that can relate. I'm okay with that too. So whatever it may be, it's not a story I'm ashamed of. God helped me through that. I had a very negative season in my life where I felt less than because I had a child out of wedlock. But once I was able to get past that and relish in the joy that it is to being a mom and now a wife and a mother of 4, and a friend to my son's father, like it's a lot of honor that God has given me the ability to have these relationships, because I feel like I did the best with what I was given, and I would like to feel like I'm honoring God in all of the roles that I have. So
Yeah. No, I think Brayden is awesome. And
I would like to think he's a good kid.
yeah, I mean, all of your kids are good, but I know with what he's had to go through in terms of, being here and being there and, the different changes. And I'm sure in any co-parenting relationship, I'm sure that's hard for any child. I know we've talked about our upbringings, and, I didn't have to go through
I don't really remember bad.
Yeah. I never had a step parent. Thank God, because I probably would have been awful as a stepchild. Let me just tell you, my parents could barely handle me as theirs. You try to bring in I will say there was a woman at one point with my dad, and she wasn't there when I would come to the house. And I think that
was best.
That spoke to the situation. That I can guarantee I am not everybody's cup of tea as a child. So that I am forever grateful for. But obviously, like I said, I come from, a weird scenario in the sense of my parents did get back together. They're not married. They didn't get remarried or anything, but they have been back together. That's also something I don't remember. There was just one day that my dad just appeared and he was there.
He never left.
Okay, we're there. And
I remember that too. Like one day your dad wasn't there, and the next day you're like, hey, my dad's here. And I was like, okay.
Okay. And then he never left. And you know what? I'm grateful for that. And, I know that that's a very rare occurrence of parents getting back together, because I'm sure I had that question several times with my parents of why can't you just be together? But I can attest to being a child of divorced parents that, it is hard to navigate in terms of the feelings of not having that full family and feeling, I'm sure every kid at one point when they go through a divorce, parents of blaming themselves, like, oh, is it me? Am I requiring too much?
Yeah. A couple of things have been like, am I not good enough? Or was I a bad kid? Things like that. I'm like, you were so young. Like, no, you were a great baby.
Yeah.
You were awesome, actually. And you were our entire world. But like, I mean, there have been just those questions that you're just like, how do I address this? Like, I feel like I've got a lot of good under my belt as a mom for the last 10 years, but there are still things that shock me.
But yeah, like I'm sure kids all have had that thought, but I can guarantee that, out of 99.9% of divorces, I can almost guarantee the child is never the issue.
Right.
And I'm sure it's hard for kids to wrap that around their head of, is it my fault?
This wasn't because of you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I asked ChatGPT earlier what kind of shirts we should talk about. And
you know what? I'm going to forget what ChatGPT said, because I don't care about graphic T-shirts. ChatGPT.
What do you want to talk about?
You have talked about how Brayden is in sports. Let's talk about sport jerseys. The only sport that I have really dealt with so far is baseball. Mm-hmm. And the shirts that they give out at where my son has played baseball, I couldn't tell you what the material is, but I think it's some kind of like moisture wicking thing, and I do like it, but it starts like picking really easily.
Mm-hmm. Is this the shirt they give you or the shirt they give them?
Well, you can buy one,
but it's like
the
team jersey.
But it's the team jersey. So that when the picking starts, I can't stand it.
Yeah.
And it's not like the same type of jersey that like a professional baseball player wear, or even on like a travel ball team or like high school team. It's not that type. It's like, it's a t-shirt. It doesn't have like button up or anything. And
like a dry fit?
Not really.
I know it's not a dry fit. I don't know.
It's like a breathable jersey.
Yeah.
It's not mesh, but they're just breathable. They're not cotton either.
I don't really know what polyester is, but that might maybe be.
Is that a fabric?
And they're able to. They're loose and they're comfy. And it was the same for soccer, which he did soccer for a season. It's just that loose, comfortable, not super tight, so you have some aero The only other difference was football. Football jerseys were a little different. They're made different.
Because they have to be bigger.
They almost look like crop tops because they're bigger to go over their pads. And that was actually like the sports
Like
ones I
jersey
got him were
material.
mesh, and they were like jersey. Mainly because the pads kept them up so they didn't ever touch their skin, so they was so breathable. But yeah, like the little kids jerseys. I mean, they're comfy.
They're not actual jerseys.
They're not
They're
actual
not jerseys,
jerseys.
but it's not like a cotton tee.
Yeah. I don't know. When I get home, maybe
I'm gonna
I'll,
look at what
I'll
it's made
find
of.
one and see if it has a tag that says like what it actually is made of.
Polyester.
Yeah.
It probably is.
If it's polyester, I'm going to give myself a big pat on the back for coming with that. But yeah, it's like this weird material. And I don't know, sometimes I'm almost like, oh, I know how much I've paid for this. Like it almost in a sense like feels cheap to me, especially when it starts picking. And I'm just like, what the heck?
Pilling?
This is
Pilling.
so mad. Yeah.
Pilling.
Yeah.
I think it's pilling.
Which is a weird word.
Whatever. You guys understood what I was
We
saying
did.
when I
We
said
did.
it. So
I will say though, neither of them have been in a sport yet where they like, and I don't know if this is like different by league, but they've never had their name on the back of the jersey. Like it's usually the sponsor, and I'm like,
yeah.
this would be really cool if their name was on it.
Yeah. We haven't been in anything that fancy yet either.
Nope.
So
This is
picking the
kind
right
of off
league, I
topic.
guess.
Totally off topic, but when I was younger, obviously I was a cheerleader and you don't get to pick a number. And I always said I wanted to play a sport that I got to pick a number.
we haven't been able to pick a number yet. Have you,
You don't
been
get
able to
to
pick a
pick them?
number? No.
I mean, he picked a number for football, but it wasn't okay. So it wasn't like pick a number. It was like, we have these jerseys. They're not consecutive order from like 1 to 30. They're just random numbers.
And you
Choose
just pick
one.
Yeah.
And then
my
like T-ball,
gosh.
when Chandler did T-ball, they just gave us a
Yeah.
jersey because
Is that how they were with Atticus? They
Because
just gave them
T-ballers,
a
they
number?
don't know their numbers,
Yeah,
so-
you just when you're filling out the form, you just have to say on there like what size shirt you need, and then they
Now,
just give you the
if
jersey.
you are like, memorabilia and you want to like, oh, Atticus started as number 2, like let's make him number 2 for his whole baseball career. Like you could do it. Like I guess you could request it, but no, we dealt with now soccer, the specific league we did. They did their numbers based off of their date of birth. So like Braden was born on June 9th. So his number was 9.
Oh.
And that was the same. And then I'm like,
Well,
how
I
does
mean,
this work? There's
Is
only
there
31.
not another kid that has a 9th birthday?
There's
just gonna have,
9.1, 9.2,
Yeah.
9.3.
So
We've got 4 nines on our
specifically
team.
for our team of like 10 or 11 boys, none of them had the same date. So I'm like, I didn't get to ask the question, but I'm like, I can see where this is like a good system, but I can see where I'm like, wait, what? Then what do you make them?
Yeah.
Do you make them 91?
Right. Yeah.
So that was different, but he hasn't been in a sport long enough consistently to be like, that's his number. He's got like a football number that he wants because his dad played football. But as far as like deciding numbers, I've never gotten to pick one.
Yeah, no.
I find that fascinating.
So
I thought that was just
I think
like a
that's more
thing.
like a high school thing. Like they get their number and they
maybe
Yeah.
once you get into high school, then
Because I always remember when we were in high school, the people who played their sports, like they were so,
Savannah begged for
Honored
cheerleaders to have
to-
numbers.
when we got to wear jerseys our senior year, I wore the crap out of that thing. And
did you guys have like Letterman jacket type of things?
So
you could buy
we
one. I
could
didn't buy one.
But what was the
I
point?
wore other people.
We got a letter.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we got a letter, we got the bars, but
Mm-hmm.
we never got the jackets. We did jerseys. Like they were super cute
yeah, they were.
football style jerseys that we did. And they had
So cute.
11 on them because that's when we graduated.
Oh, okay.
So,
And we wore them on
if
Fridays.
Savannah says that's her number because that's the
That
only
was my
number she
number.
ever got.
That was my number. I played soccer when I was 3 or 4.
Yeah, what was your number? You don't know.
I don't know. There has to be a picture somewhere. The trophy got hidden behind cheerleading trophies
Of
all
course,
my
of
life,
course.
but there has to be. But I always found that fascinating. Like I said, because in high school, the
Having
people
a number
who-
is serious.
Yeah, they were dedicated to their numbers.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
people
yeah.
got
Well-
put on their cars. That was their passwords.
That and even our high school, it didn't happen in our specific class, but like they retired a jersey
Mhm.
of one of the players who had passed. Like so they like did the full like retired the jersey number.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So like you get numbers.
Yeah, and they were dedicated to those numbers. And like if you're a returning athlete on that
You
sport,
get dibs.
you get that number. Like
Yeah.
Like no new person can come in.
Hopefully
and
you're
request
not
that number.
coming from another school and you have the same number because
You're probably not going to
you're
get
probably
it.
not going to get it.
So I was always interested. So I find that very interesting.
Yeah. Little League, they just don't care.
I mean, I guess the little kids, they don't really care.
Now, I
but-
will say my nephew, he started baseball when he was young and he's done it consistently. And so like when he got to the point where he was like, I'm number like 6, I'm number whatever. And so it stayed and he's 11. So for the last 5 years, he's been the same number. So like, just depends on, I guess, the kid. And
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe if you were a coach or at least good friends with a coach or somebody higher up, then maybe you could say it. But like, I don't know if there was even like a spot like on the application, like for you to say like, and we'd like number 4 or something.
Special instructions, like, other notes.
Yeah.
I think 4 would be my number if I picked.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You know what? I really like
4
the
was
number,
always my lucky number.
2, and I really like the number 3, which is odd because I don't really like odd numbers. So,
I mean, if we're getting down to the nitty gritty, my favorite number is 47. But
well, that is really weird.
yeah. But you can't have a number that's 47. That's just too high. You need to
That's
have
not
a lower
true.
number.
I'm telling you.
You could totally have 47.
There was
if it's
not-
your favorite number,
there
put
was
it
not-
on your jersey.
There was not 55 kids on that Little League football team, and Braden was number 55. Like, random number. Like, we had a 99.
Yeah. Yeah. I hate when there's like professional athletes and they're number 0. Like, you are a professional.
Just
Pick a
choose
number.
one.
We didn't really
number.
want you here. You're
was
not
one
going to
person-
last very long.
I will say on the Orlando Magic, I loved him, Aaron Gordon, but he was like 00. And I'm like, what are we doing? Well, we have gone on quite the tangent here.
Yes.
I'll
have to cut.
I was going to say, I'm
the last like 25 minutes.
Anyways, well, thank you for joining us on our first episode back of season 2 of Girls Talk Shirts. We will be back next week talking about who knows what.
I don't know. I'm trying to get a lot more serious for this season and try to have guests as much as we can and talking about real topics. I've emailed a lot of Lakeland's finest and nobody has emailed me back, probably because I'm a nobody. And why would they email me
There's
back?
somebody to me.
But thank you.
A person's a person, no matter how small.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Seuss. But yeah, so hopefully we will have something good to really talk about next week. Because I want this season to just be so much better than, I thought last season was pretty decent.
It was good.
But I want this season to
grow,
raise the bar and grow and hopefully reach more people. I lost sight of the spider.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah.
All right. Well, we will be much more active on the Instagram, I'm sure, now that season 2 is ramping up. But it will still be Girls Talk Tuesdays, I believe, is when our episodes are going to drop. So keep an eye out for that. And we will talk to you guys next week. Morgan, thank you so much again for coming.
Yes, thank
You're
you.
welcome anytime.
I'm sure there will be many more instances.
Hey, we could do, if we're in a pinch, we could do Girls Talk Fine Arts Part 2. I mean, I'm sure
I think we
there's
talked
more.
out.
I'm sure there's more we could talk about.
All right, guys. Well, we will talk to you at our next episode.
All right. Bye.
Bye.